handsome, the boy from Ipanema goes walking, and when he passes, each time he passes, I go. When he walks, he's like a samba that swings so cool and sways so gentle that when he passes, each time he passes, I go. Oh, but I watch him so sadly. How can I tell him I love him? Yes, I would give my heart gladly. But each day when he walks to the sea, he looks straight ahead, not at me. Tall and tan and young and handsome, the boy from Ipanema goes walking. And when he passes, I smile, but he doesn't see.
Technical glitch already. Hello and welcome to our Children, Youth and Families team webinar on supporting families. We're going to introduce you to the panellists, Gail and Claire, in a minute. But just to say, for those who are new to Zoom webinars, it's slightly different to a Zoom meeting in that it's watch and listen. So if you wanted to interact, then you need to use the Q&A function, which you can find at the bottom of your screens. And that's where you can enter any questions that you might have as the webinar progresses. Just so you know, we're going to have a short 15-minute break so that you can stretch your legs partway through the session. And it's going to last just over an hour, and so we'll hopefully be finished just before 4. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Gail, who's the Families and Intergenerational Development Officer for the Children, Youth and Family team, and Claire, who is the Community Outreach Team Leader in Wokingham. Gail.
Thanks, Lynn. It's really good to be with you, everyone, this afternoon. Thanks for tuning in. And this is a new venture for us, offering opportunities to learn together via Zoom webinars. And so we're really excited that this is the first of these sessions that we're offering this afternoon. And there are more which we'll share about as well with you later on. So we're going to, in a moment, take a little look at kind of what we're hoping our journey is going to look like this afternoon. So I think Matt's going to be sharing the screen and taking a little look at our first slide in a moment, because through the course of this afternoon, we're going to have some stops along the way for our learning journey, as I'm going to describe it. So we are, as Lynn said, we're going to pause for 5 minutes mid-session, just so you can stretch your legs and grab a drink. And hopefully what you'll be able to do this afternoon is reflect on your own experience, so the work that you're doing with children, young people and families, and also to share that perhaps with other people, to ask questions through the Q&A, and maybe take away some ideas that are going to influence your own practice. Also this afternoon is going to, there's a book giveaway, which I'm really excited that there are 5 copies of my book. Some of you may have seen it, The Essential Guide to Family Ministry. Much of what we're learning about this afternoon comes from chapter 5 of my book. It's based on that chapter, but Claire and I have done some work to try and make it more relevant for the times that we're in at the moment. So if you would like to get your hands on a copy of the book, if you've not got one already, there's some very simple things that you can do. So you can take a photograph of where you're joining in from, because we would love to see, because of the nature of a Zoom webinar, we can't actually see you as if we were in a meeting. So we would love to see through your photographs on Twitter where you're joining in from. So you can use the hashtag supporting families, and then you can tag Essential2, which is the account for the book. And you can share your pictures via Twitter, and we would love to see those. If you're not on Twitter, then you can email them into us, and you can use the Children and Youth email account. The address will be coming up in a moment on one of the slides, so you'll be able to see it shortly. I think it's the one after this. Here we go. So we're going to choose 5 of those photographs at random once the session is over. And yeah, email childrenandyouth@methodistchurch.org.uk. We'll take a look at those, and we'll choose 5 copies and get in touch with you if you are going to receive one of those books, which would be great for us to share. Now, if we go back to the previous slide, talking about the learning journey today, so 3 steps really for us as we move along. So the first one is we're going to explore what some of the features of support look like. We're going to talk a little bit about what makes that meaningful and relevant, and particularly in this time where we've been living through the pandemic, support looks different for lots of us, which is why this session felt important to offer. And then finally, we want to talk a little bit later about what those routes into providing support might look like. And all the time as we're doing this, you need to bear in mind your own context. So the church where you are based, maybe the church where you work or you volunteer, and also about what those families look like in that community. So who are the people that you're interacting with, that you're engaging with? What are they perhaps looking for at this time in terms of support? There is also going to be a special offer which BRF have kindly offered on my book, and I'll give you more details about that later on. So to open our session, we've got a poll for you. And this is one little way that we can gather some of your thoughts. So Matt's going to pop that up in a moment. And our question is, how often have you been in touch with families that you know and work with during the lockdown? So you've got 5 options there. Choose your option, give it a little click, whether it's daily or most days, 3 or 4 times a week, once or twice a week, or less than once a week. So choose an option, and we'll give you a moment or 2, and then we'll take a look at the results. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to do the poll, and in a moment we'll be able to take a look at the results. So once or twice a week is by far, wow, that's really interesting. So quite frequently, actually, half of you said that you've been in touch once or twice. So that's really interesting. And a small group, a small percentage, are actually in touch most days, which, gosh, that's quite something. So thank you for sharing that. So clearly we've been working hard at remaining in touch with people. I'm sure that we're doing that within our work settings, but also more widely in life anyway, because of being at home so much more often. So we're going to move through to our introduction slide. Let's start to think about why support matters. Why would the church be interested in caring for families and offering them support? Now, if you are a parent or a carer, or you look after children and young people in any shape or form, you might have some sense actually that life is often challenging, and that being a parent or carer, raising a family, juggling all the various demands, can take its toll. And for many of us, in the process of doing that, we experience feelings of guilt, we may feel inadequate, we might feel actually that we're ill-equipped for the task. I was reflecting that when I became a teacher, I had to go and do 4 years of higher study and training before I was allowed to be in a classroom with children. Whereas I seemed to just do a handful of antenatal sessions and suddenly I had the responsibility of another small human all of the time. And I was just contrasting actually that perhaps frankly I would have been better off having done 4 years of preparation and doing it round the other way. So many of parents and carers actually don't feel that it comes naturally to them to be in that role. And so it means that we need to find methods to extend our loving, our generous and supportive hands to people whose help is needed. And so especially during this current crisis, families are finding that they're under increased strain and stress. And for many of you who are tuning in right now, that may also be your own lived experience at this time. The nature of the pandemic has brought new difficulties as well as highlighting ones which may have lay hidden below the surface. And perhaps in some families where there have been hairline cracks within their lives together, those have actually been opening up more widely. But there is also the biblical precedents for supporting families. And we can see it in Jesus' ministry as we read through the Gospels, as we hear about those accounts of how he's meeting people, how he's talking to them, so many of which take place in people's homes. And so there is something around the way in which Jesus ministers and cares for people, how he's offering them pastoral support, which means that he recognises that the home is important, that that's a place where he can meet people in authentic ways. So let's have a go at trying to define what family support is. And on page 79 of my book, I said this: that it's all about seeking to promote parenting confidence. It's about increasing self-esteem and nurturing relationships between parents and their children, whatever age they may be. So we're not just talking about those early years, we're talking about their offspring or whatever age they might be. So I wonder if this tallies with your own understanding. I hope it highlights the heart of what we hope to do by raising people's confidence in their sense of connection to one another, how they are able to increase their sense of well-being as they live together as a whole. And although in this statement it talks about parents, I want to be clear that I'm including carers. I'm talking about grandparents, the significant adults who are in the lives of children, young people, young adults. And actually, all of us will have perhaps those figures in our lives who have been like mothers or like fathers to us. And so it's really key that we recognise the importance of the role that they have. We know that family functions in a variety of ways, and that sometimes it's through the blood ties that exist between people. Sometimes there aren't any blood ties. And for instance, an example of that would be a good friend of mine who had 2 children of her own. And then a number of circumstances led them to the adoption of 2 other younger children. And so they went from being a family of 4, her and her husband having their 2 children, to then adopting these other 2 children who were part of their extended family, adopting them into their own home and household. And so they're now a family of 6, and that's altered the kind of the dynamics of how their family functions and operates, but they're still very much family for and with each other. So I want to just bring Claire in at this point and say, actually, Claire, some of what I was just saying really about the nature of being in the pandemic, how perhaps has that impacted you in your role as a lay worker in your community? Have you had to adapt how you're doing things? Tell us a bit about what you've been doing.
Yeah, obviously, I've had to really adapt what I'm doing in terms of obviously nothing's face to face. The context that I work in normally is in a cafe environment, a big community centre that's buzzing and thriving. And obviously that's not part of what I'm doing anymore. So adapting, I didn't even know what Zoom was in probably February, never used it before in my life, and now I use it several times a day probably. But I'm trying to really take from the situation some like really good things about how we're working now that can be kind of continued. So things like I've been doing messy church. We used to call our messy church at 4. It's now Zoom at 4. Obviously slightly different context, and it is just about chatting to people. But I found that maybe dads who wouldn't have come to messy church, the whole family sitting round for the Zoom call, and that's really nice. It's almost like you've got an audience, everyone's a bit more willing to join in. I think social media has been massive for me. My role is kind of an all-age role, truly intergenerational. So it's made me think about people. I'm lucky that I haven't had to shield. I can go out and do things, and how important it is to share some of what I've been doing in my personal world, i.e. going for a nice walk with the dog, with other people that might not be able to do it, and just kind of being a bit of a window on the world for those people that are they're isolated really, and are living on their own, haven't got family to hand and things. And I guess the phone as well. I'm not a massive telephone lover, but I've suddenly had to be phoning people a lot to kind of make contact with them. So yeah. And I think in my role, and I'm sure other people watching will have found, when this first started, I was a bit kind of, oh my goodness, what do I do, how do I start this? And it might have been a bit quieter, and I'm almost finding now I'm busier than I was before, because there are so many things I can do. So that's a good thing.
Gosh, no, it sounds as though you've had to do quite a lot of very quick kind of adapting and being very flexible, frankly, to discover
and not necessarily things that I've always been comfortable with. This, I mean, and I would say, on behalf of other people watching this, that this isn't quite the role that I thought I was going to be doing. So it is really interesting. So
I think that's one of the wonderful things, though, that actually, bearing in mind that we're working for the institution of the church, that the church has been able to flex in this time, and has been in many ways quite, quick to respond. And so I think that kind of shows actually that ability is there, isn't it? And we can find different ways of doing things if the need arises. I mean, it's kind of forced upon us, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. And there are things that I think we'll take from this time that won't go back. So
I love that you're getting the whole family, and I wonder actually if the family's something like that, if you're at home all the time, it becomes an event in your day, doesn't it? So you can kind of then say, well, actually, let's all make sure that we're ready for joining in this thing at 4 o'clock, because we can't go anywhere. So actually, how do you have that sense of going to something and being part of something?
Yeah, definitely. And I think also something that I've found people really have said that they look forward to is, because obviously we have a coffee shop in our community centre and we can't do that, we're hosting I'm hosting Zoom coffee mornings a couple of times a week, and people have said they really look forward to having that, like 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, make a coffee, sit down, and I can chat to everybody. And not everyone says a lot, but I think it's quite nice to just have that interaction with familiar people in the way that you would have done before, in that kind of way.
Yes, no, I think that's really important. I was surprised at myself when we did our first all-age Zoom service in our church on Easter Day, actually how overwhelmed I was just to see people's faces and be all in that one place together. And it really moved me actually to just have that sense of community with people, even though it was in a digital space. I hadn't really expected that.
Yeah, and I think that it's enhanced my relationships with some people that I didn't know quite so well.
Yeah, No, I think you're probably right. Thank you for that. We're going to take a look now at our next section, which is going to be on slide 6. And we're going to think about the features of support. So what are the kind of characteristics in a way of the support that we may want to be offering? And so I'd like to suggest that perhaps there are 5 things, and often these are just sort of woven into the fabric of what we do, that we don't really kind of step out to see that's what we're doing because they're so naturally a part of it. And especially during this time, it's important to consider how we can offer these kinds of things within the constraints, frankly, and the circumstances that we're living in. So if we're aware of the fact that families aren't going out quite so much, that they are spending more time together and at home, they may want to use that time differently. So perhaps it does free up some time, as Claire was just saying, made it possible for families to all join in, whereas in the past perhaps only one of the parents and the children were. So as we look through these things, have a little think about how does the time that we're in impede what we're trying to do? What kind of barriers might it be putting in the way? But also what might the opportunities be for us at this time? And some of those things that Claire shared may also be relevant for you. You may recognise those things in what you've been doing. So it's worth just bearing in mind how things can be barriers, but also how they can present us with some opportunities. So are we discovering new effective methods of support that we have overlooked in the past? So the first one on this list of 5 talks about being family centred. And I think this is crucial because what it does is it takes the needs and views of a family seriously. They become the drivers of what we do. When we plan, we take into consideration the kinds of families that we're working with and how provision is going to fit in with their lifestyle more broadly. So at the moment, families may well find that they're experiencing different pressures to usual. So how are we finding out about those things? How are we understanding more of what the situation is for them within their 4 walls of home? Does that mean that their needs have changed? And so actually we've got to be thinking about different things in order to offer them that's going to be relevant. Secondly, we want to be sure that our support contains lots of signposting, and by that I mean that we're sharing information that families need in very helpful ways. So we're letting them know what is available for them locally, what is in their community, what can they access that's nearby. That may be through needing to use technology by making a phone call or going onto a website. How are we sharing perhaps some of those fact sheets around kind of supporting our children during this time? Are we able to email and attach those things so that they can look at them? Are we using our social media channels to let people know what is available? And in our role as folk who are working in lay settings, as we are, actually we may need to change the things that we're signposting to. So as we're gathering all that information about what's available, we've got to go away and do our homework and do our research and make sure that we're offering what people need at this current time. Now we're trying quite hard as the Children's and Family team to share that information. We're doing our research to put it out there, and we're also putting resource onto the Children and Youth website pages on the Methodist Church website. So hopefully by checking that, you're going to feel that you're well equipped, that you're aware of the places where people can go to access additional knowledge and information. Thirdly, we can't forget about the great difference it can make to offer ways for people to support each other with their peers. And actually, often if there have been families, if there have been parents and carers who have found themselves in the same situation, they are the best people to provide support because they know what it's like. They know they know the feelings of being in that time. And so if we can sometimes connect people up, if we can introduce people, that can be really useful. If we can ask their advice. What do you think? You know, how could I respond to this? You've been there. What was it like for you? How could I help these people? They may well have some really helpful things to say. It helps us to know that other people are in the same boat, doesn't it? And I think particularly at this moment, I'm noticing on social media, people post things that say, you know, today I've really struggled, I found today difficult. I was thinking particularly of an account that I follow on Instagram, and she posted a little video of her toddler, and just with a little quote, anyone else having a day like this? And actually there was a huge amount of empathy and compassion, and people saying, yeah, my day's been tough and I'm finding it really hard. And so there's something in recognizing that with one another that can really just help us feel less alone, which helps us feel that actually everyone else has bad days. Tomorrow hopefully will be a better day. So let's make sure that we're prioritizing some of those peer connections. It's about offering answers. It's about letting people know there is support around them. And then also there's this thing around accessibility. And if we were perhaps in church buildings, accessibility would be focused on the physical aspects of actually getting, say, into buildings. It might be thinking about the hearing loops that there are to help people take in and listen to what's being said. Where we are at the moment, I think there are some really big questions around accessibility in terms of people's access to technology, because we can't assume that everybody has a smartphone, that people have got tablets or laptops or you know, up-to-date computers. In some families, they may be one phone, and if there are multiple children, they can't all access the phone if they've got schooling to do. So we need to be thinking beyond our digital resource and our digital responses. So what else? What other ways might we be able to reach out to people? And you know, I think at the moment there is something really powerful about a note card or a little letter that we put through someone's letterbox. I think that for many people who are indoors, perhaps for the people who've been shielding, for people who haven't been seeing other human beings in their day-to-day life, that having that connection is really powerful and important. So let's think about what different people and different families might need from us if they haven't necessarily got lots of tech at their fingertips. And then finally, we can't ignore the fact that all of these things have an element of needing to be God-inspired. And by that, what I mean is that there is a spiritual dimension to what we do. We invite God to come in, to dwell and move amongst us through the things that we say, through the things that we do. And actually, it's important for us as folk in ministry to set aside time to be tuning into God, to be asking him, what do you need of me? And asking him to perhaps give us those nudges to help us recognise perhaps things that we've not even been considering. So listening in to God can be transformative in ministry, because he's going to be helping and guiding us to the places and the people that we need to be. So let's bring up another poll now. This is our second poll of the afternoon. Bearing in mind that you've been doing a great job of staying in contact with the families that you know and work with, I wonder what's been the most effective way of doing that. So we're talking about methods and the platforms. So again, you've got 5 options. Phone calls, emails, notes and cards, social media, or virtual get-togethers. Now, I'm afraid I think you can only choose one. So you might have some tough choices to make. Just pick your favourite, I guess. And we'll have a little look. Maybe the one that you've done most of, that would perhaps be interesting to know. So a moment or two to click your choice, and then we'll have a little look at your responses. So Matt, whenever you're ready, when you're satisfied that people have chosen, feel free to show us the results. So here we go. So by far, we've been using social media. So that, yes, so about 2/3, it's social media. That's been a really big tool for us. And I would guess Facebook. That would be probably the platform, perhaps. Oh, here's a little point from Fiona. She says actually got big response from text, which wasn't on the list. Okay, I guess I would have lobbed that into phone calls maybe. So lots of virtual get-togethers as well, which I'm really pleased to hear about, that we've been offering those opportunities, and also lots of notes and cards, which is really nice. Brilliant. Now going to hand over to Claire. You might want to pick up, Claire, on some of those things that were just shared in the poll. And Claire's going to talk to us a little bit about making support meaningful and relevant. And we're going to move on to slide 7 now.
Okay, so yeah, one of the things that I did quite early on was send Easter cards to all the households in our church directory, and that went down really well, and I think the families really appreciated that. Just it was a bit of a mammoth task, but that was something that that they really liked. And I think another thing that we're doing is getting some of the children from the church to draw pictures. We've got a link with one of the local care homes, so we're going to send some of the pictures to the residents in the care home, and that's kind of quite a nice way of engaging people. And I actually think that aside from homeschooling, parents are probably quite happy to have the additional little things that they can give their children to do. So yeah, so I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that we've never really experienced anything like this time that we're living through at the moment, and it has brought some challenges and difficulties, and it's shown up or highlighted some of our vulnerability probably during this time, and I think I've found when I've been speaking to families or working with families over this time, that obviously, bearing in mind boundaries, something that's been really appreciated is for us to have a time of sharing. And that might be that I, in my context or in my own family setting, make myself vulnerable by sharing things with them, and to show some understanding with the families of some of the things they're going through. So I guess meaningful and relevant support, you can we can have formal or informal support. Formal leans towards things like education, which they're probably getting loads of or not from school, and they're probably kind of up to here with that kind of stuff at the moment. But I think in this situation, in our context, probably informal, where we're kind of building more on friendships and relationships, and getting to know people and how they're kind of coping in this situation is more relevant. And that might be through a phone call, a postcard, again, a chat on social media. It could be through any kind of context, but I think it is a bit more informal. As I said about being vulnerable before, I think it's important for people to understand that we also have shared kind of interests with them, and shared needs. So I'll probably touch on it in a little while, but I'm the mum of somebody who thought she was going to be sitting her GCSEs and going to prom this year, and going to college in September, hopefully still is going to college in September. But that's been a bit of a roller coaster of emotion for me, kind of navigating my way through, helping her and supporting her, and giving her a sense of purpose. And I think that's kind of made it easier, or I'm able to understand more people that are in those situations, and also kind of have a chat with her to enable me to understand where those young people that are going through that, whether it be A levels or university or GCSEs, how they're kind of feeling. And I think that it's really important for us to make what we do a bit more lighthearted and fun. as well, because everything's a bit serious at the moment. And I think that if we kind of added to that, that would be the wrong thing. So our support can be a bit more lighthearted and fun, as well as being kind of mutual. And I think what we were saying, or what Gail was saying earlier about kind of facilitating relationships, it might be that we haven't got all the answers ourselves, but we know another family who's in a similar situation, and just being able to kind of signpost those families or make them connect them in some way so that they can share is a really massive thing that we can do. Because I still think that we're in a position where we have lots of generations and lots of people with kind of different backgrounds, and we're able to kind of put those relationships into action rather than it being certain age groups and things. And I think we need to be aware of the different stages that people are going through. So it could be that a grandparent hasn't seen their grandchildren for 10 weeks. It could be the teenager who's not doing her exams. It could be a toddler who's going back to nursery, or it could be somebody preparing to go to secondary school who's in year 6 and a little bit uncertain things aren't ever going to be the same again. So what we do with each stage might be different, even if it's to do with the same thing. So a parent of a teenager needs something different from us to the actual teenager, but I think that's something we can be aware of. So I think if we're not afraid to share our own experiences, not afraid to say we don't have all the answers, but we can support you and show you God's love and grace and understanding, and maybe facilitate a relationship with somebody else who can kind of help or empathize, and really appreciate that people are in different situations. And I think massively listen to what families are saying to us and listen to each other as well, because I think that's all people need sometimes, is to, Gail was talking about Instagram, somebody posting that they'd had a really hard day with their toddler. You know, that's all sometimes people want to say to you, is this is really, really hard. And for us to not judge and just say, yeah, it's tough. It's tough. Okay.
Thanks, Claire. Really appreciate you sharing those things, and I think just highlighting that just that importance of being alert and aware of the ways in which people are in need of support right now, and that because of the circumstances that we're in, and because we're all in it at the same time, that opportunity for us to be vulnerable actually is more important perhaps than it's ever been.
I think something else that is that you kind of feel as if you shouldn't, if you're feeling worried about something or concerned about something, because everyone's going through it, you think that you should just man up a little bit, but actually we are all, this is a real major thing for everybody, and you've got to be kind of kind to yourself as well, and allow people to be kind to themselves. So
yeah, I've loved this year that there's so much more talk about kindness, that kindness has taken on this whole new kind of dimension in life, and it feels like it's a much more powerful thing, that it's become it's not a passive thing anymore, but actually it's something that you really proactively demonstrate and show to people, and we're so appreciative of it at the moment, aren't we? Just the fact that a friend the other day just brought round a cake for my husband and I, and sort of left it in a bag on our doorstep. Those little gestures from people, just one sort of reminds you, oh yeah, they're our friends, these are our relationships, they see us and remember us. Just spark a lot of joy, don't they, those kind of ways of demonstrating kindness, I guess.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be a grand gesture, does it? It can be just something thoughtful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we're going to head off into a 5-minute break. Literally, it's just time for a quick wriggle, grab a drink. Maybe if you're super quick, you can boil a kettle and make a cup of tea. and maybe grab some cake or a snack and come back again in 5 minutes. In this time, use the Q&A and put in any questions that you've got. And also, it might be worth thinking about what might be the focus of support for you right now. Spend a minute or two perhaps thinking about that, bearing in mind the families that you know. What are you drawn to for their sake that you think actually they would really benefit through being offered this? The chat might still also be open for you if you wanted to put some thoughts into there. Matt, if we could just pop up slide 9, because I want to tell you about the offer that BRF are making available to everyone who's part of this webinar. So if you've registered for today, there is a limited offer. If you use the discount code Adcock15 in the checkout, you'll get 15% off all of the titles that you order in that one order. And it's valid from today through to next Friday. So you need to head over to brfonline.org.uk and you can take a look. And I would really recommend, if you have got the book already, and I realise this is shameless plugging everybody, but if you've got one already, who are the people you know who would benefit from having this book perhaps left on their desk, put through their letterbox, left on their doorstep? Who do you think it would be good to read it? Maybe you'd want to put a bookmark in and say, this chapter is really important for us. So share it, perhaps get it for your youth worker, perhaps get them to start to think about families, but maybe think about ordering another copy that you can give to somebody because it's going to be useful for all of you. So we're off for 5 minutes and just use the same link, come straight back in, and we'll be back with you at about, what is the time now? Yeah, at 3:20. So see you shortly.
switching like all others do. I'm ready to make up. It's all up to you now, 'cause 7 days is too long without you, baby. Come on back to me now. 7 days is too long, girl, without you, baby. Come on back to me. I refuse to break up because of a lie. 'Cause our love is too strong, girl. Yes, it is, to let it down. Let's solve this problem. 'Cause I see the danger sign, you know. It's written on your face. Just as well as mine. 'Cause 7 days is too long, girl, without you, baby. Come on back to me now. 7 days is too long without you, baby. Come on back to me. Let's stop playing, girl. I ain't gonna sing. I can't stand being without you, baby. No, I can't. Another week. You got me sold. Look, I can't even concentrate. You know, good things come. I say good things come to those who wait. But I can't wait no longer. Listen to me, baby, because 7 days is too long now without you, baby. Come on back to me. 7 days is too long without you, baby. Come on back to me. I love you, it's too long in your body, honey. Without 7 days is too long.
Hi everybody, welcome back. We're now into the second part of our webinar about supporting families, and we're going to move on from thinking about how we make our support meaningful and relevant into thinking about what those routes into support look like. And this is all about tailoring it for the different ages and stages of the families that we know. Because actually what we want to strive to do is to meet their needs at the right time. And so if in my church community, whether that's in our church congregation or more widely out into the schools and the community surrounding us, there are lots of families actually who haven't got many children, the support I'm going to offer will perhaps look different. If I'm looking to do a toddler group 5 days a week, that's not going to be relevant and useful. So we've got to be aware of who it is that we want to work with. So I've created this very, very messy diagram, and this took me a little while because I was thinking, how can this be represented? Because actually family life is not a linear development process. Family life changes, it's complex, and so there are often points, perhaps, maybe it's best to talk about it in terms of a spiral, because sometimes you can sort of spiral back round. So for instance, somebody is divorced, maybe they've got teenage children, they marry a single person or cohabit with a single person, and then they have young children. So that person finds themselves back at kind of the early years stage of family life. So the kind of support they need will need to be tailored for them. And that happens all the way through all these different sort of stages in life. And one of the things that I would observe is that often within churches, our support is tailored to people perhaps in the early years or the primary years. And family support is something we concentrate on those in that group. Because actually it's maybe it's just more straightforward, and we kind of understand that there's quite a lot of practical need that we can help with, so that makes sense to us. Churches historically, traditionally, offer very little in the way of family support for teenagers, for families who've got adolescents. And I think that's a real shame. I think we would do well to explore ways in which we're able to offer support to those families, because actually many parents and carers really need help and support in that phase of life. And I was aware when my children went off to high school a few years back, that actually all of that peer support that I really valued, say in the school playgrounds as you were picking up children, actually you lose all of that in the teenage years, because you're no longer picking up your kids after school. You haven't got those little snatched conversations with people about, you know, my child is spending too much time on their phone, or my child doesn't let me know what they're doing and I'm worried because they're staying out late. And for me, in my situation, what really helped was the fact that my son played football, and so we had regular meetups, training and at matches, where we could chat to each other, and we all had boys, and so we were able to kind of reflect on our experiences of raising teenage boys and think about, actually, is this, you know, this is happening at the moment, any happening to anybody else? How are you dealing with this? What helps you? And just kind of empathize with each other about some of the challenges during that time. And so I think there's, you know, I like to think that I developed a ministry on the touchline during that phase of our life, because it was really important to be just listening to people and sharing some of those experiences. So let's make sure when we're thinking about what those routes into support look like, that we are remembering it includes single people. Single people are parts of extended families. They have often roles as significant adults in family life, and that's really important. And particularly in the context of faith, we know that other significant adults in children's lives really do make a difference when it comes to them growing up and into faith and owning a faith of their own. Sometimes as our children grow up, they need other adults around them that they can talk to perhaps a bit more honestly and openly, because for whatever reason, that's something that they don't find able to do with us. So sometimes making sure that there are other adults who are part of our families can actually really make a difference. So we need to think creatively about how we involve people. I'm currently sort of in that, on the brink of that empty nester stage. My youngest son is living at home right now. We're nowhere near the grandparent stage. We sort of entered this weird limbo of not sort of being a family with children sort of living with us, and equally not sort of grandparents. And in terms of church, that's a bit of an odd thing, I have to confess, because we kind of, for us, that's meant thinking a bit about what does our place then look like, and how do we sort of get to know people better, because we're not in the same boat. We're not dropping our kids off into Sunday school anymore, and so that makes a difference really in terms of how we engage with other people. So I want to bring you in, Claire, to carry on this bit of the conversation about routes of support, because I think in reflecting on your recent experience, would you have perhaps any examples of things that you think actually that made me think of this?
Well, there's obviously my own experience with my own family. So I've got a 19-year-old who was going up to London to do a level 4 qualification 2 days a week. She's now at home doing her learning, and then working every other hour possibly that God is sending her to Tesco's. So that's been a bit of a challenge, because my instinct's been a bit like, what do you mean you're going up there with lots of other people? You're going to go and work there and there's lots of other people there. So that's been a challenge. And then obviously Lauren, my daughter, and her GCSEs, that, as I touched on earlier, has been a bit of a roller coaster. She started off without a sense of purpose, because suddenly there wasn't any work being set for year 11, because the teachers quite early on knew that they had to mark things and submit their kind of predicted grades, and that was quite challenging, kind of keeping her motivated to. She's really good. She's kind of got up and done things in the morning, but kind of just we had some real low points, and how to deal with that is quite hard, because I've never ever in my whole life not either gone to school or gone to work or just had a baby kind of scenario. You know, you've always had something going on that you've kind of got up for, kind of thing. And I think that was quite a challenge. And now we're in this weird thing where she's kind of come out the other side of it. Quite happy that she hasn't got 3 exams today, because every morning I've got in my diary her exam timetable, and I kind of say, oh, you'd have had 3 exams today. But we're also now coming through the other side where she misses some key friends, but they're obviously friends that she doesn't miss. And things like her prom have been postponed rather than cancelled. And she's not sure now that in September or October or whenever it might take place that she wants to do it now, because it's kind of going to be past that point. So I think those things are a challenge. I think that something I've noticed with her as well, with both my children, is a bit of peer pressure as well. Yeah. So she has had friends who haven't necessarily done the right thing, have got in the car and gone to the beach with their boyfriend, kind of thing. And we're very much kind of staying by the rules. My mum's been quite ill, not through corona, but during this process my mum's been in hospital, so we've been quite certain to make sure that we're definitely adhering to the rules and everything. But there is a bit of peer pressure now. Things are loosening up. Oh, come on, we can get 10 of us in the park, it'll be fine. And there's kind of peer pressure. I really want to do that, but I really want to do the right thing as well. So I think that's a whole new kind of level of support. So yeah, and then an example I've got about a young child, one of my neighbours. We've got a neighbour called Isla, who's 3. And I don't know about you, but we've seen lots of things in the media about people really worrying about sending children back to school and things. And Isla's mum's actually expecting a baby in July as well. And Isla was going back to nursery on Monday, and everyone was a bit kind of, we have a bit of a neighbourhood gathering sometimes, and everyone was a bit like, oh, Isla's going back to school. Isla was absolutely beyond excited, because she was going on Monday into bubble number 3, and that was going to be really exciting to go back to nursery and be in bubble number 3. And I think that really spoke to me, because Isla is so, because she's little, she's not got any preconception, she's just adapting to all of this stuff that's going on around her so readily. She's not questioning that we're all sitting in the middle of the road at the weekend, away from each other, having a drink, and you know, she just kind of rolls with it. And I think there's something to be taken from that. And I think all of us have I've had to have words in my family about, can we not have the news on all the time? And I think that there's a balance between keeping children and young people a little bit informed and a bit aware of, this is why we have to do what we do, but not frightening them. Because I think also that I found in my household with my teenagers, it got to a point where we hadn't been out for so long that she was almost scared to go out. It was almost kind of, oh, I don't want to go out because I will catch it. And so I think that we have to be really careful and cautious about it, because young children are obviously showing, or they've shown me recently, that they can handle it in a way, you know, they just adapt to the situation.
They're processing it differently, aren't they, because of their age. And I think one of the things that makes me think about actually is how are parents able to sort of process their fears about this time in ways which aren't always in earshot of their children. So which is really hard when everybody's at home, but actually I think it's really important that parents can just have really honest spaces for them to be able to have that conversation, because sometimes children can just become aware of that sense of anxiety that their parent has about these things, and not fully understand quite why that is, and doesn't understand some of those implications. So I think, is that about a balance, do you think, perhaps?
I think it is, and I think it is just kind of you need to I think we need to be careful about rationalizing all the stuff on the media, because everything on the media, and every night there's a program on about it, and it's all about people in intensive care or people dying. And okay, so it's 5 o'clock, here is the Prime Minister or the Health Minister, and they're going to tell us that today 300 people have died. And you have to, you've got to kind of dilute that for them for a bit, because I think for all of us that's quite powerful, and you can really get caught up in that. But children, or young people especially, really can dwell on that stuff and not have the overall perspective or the experience to kind of think, okay, let's just think about this for a moment and put it in perspective. You know, they haven't got that so much.
And it's kind of helping everyone to feel, do you know what, your response to that is valid. And if you watch something that makes you worried, that's just as valid as someone who watches it and thinks, actually, that doesn't really bother me. So we have to sort of respect one another in that way.
And it's far healthier to kind of have a conversation about how they're feeling than for them to go away and be, I mean, obviously mental health has been a massive thing during this crisis as well, and I think that young people especially, if they are then tucking something away because they know that their mum's upset or whatever, that's not great either. They need to be able to talk things through and be able to have a conversation about rationalizing it. So
it's a good thing that the next webinar we've got lined up is one around mental health and well-being. So you can find out details about that. That's coming up in a couple of weeks' time. I was also sort of thinking, Claire, that there's at the moment all of us experiencing trauma in different degrees, and that we need to be finding and this feels like a much longer term question really, which is around how we're sort of coping with some of our grief and bereavement during this time. And for some people that will be really powerful. It'll be a really strong emotional reaction because they've lost people that they love. People have died, but also if we look at it from perhaps a child or young person's point of view, they're also grieving certain things. So for instance, your daughter, the fact that she doesn't get her prom, that some of those rites of passage don't happen for them or happen differently. I'm sure that there's some support around that which would be really useful.
yeah, I do think that some of those aspects, some of the impact of some of those things probably won't emerge for quite a long time. I know something as well that she's been quite worried is that she's going to be kind of branded one of those, she was from that year that they didn't do their GCSEs kind of thing. And I would imagine that she's talked to her friends. I would think that's probably quite a thing for a lot of them. You know, this is the first year. But on the other hand, she's also, with the benefit of hindsight, said, don't anyone ever in the future take your mocks for granted, because when they say they might have to fall back on your mocks, actually, yeah, you might have to fall back on your mocks. So do revise for them. So yeah, there is probably a little bit of wisdom to be imparted by this year's year 11s and year 13s.
No, definitely. Thank you for all of that. Alongside the webinar I mentioned about mental health and well-being, we've got another conversation that's planned in this series of webinars, which is essentially going to be a big Zoom meeting, and we want to give everybody an opportunity to share some of the things that you've been learning, that you've been experiencing and encountering during this time, because we think that there's a lot of learning to be done. And I think certainly as we start to sort of look forward, there's a bit of a new reality that we're sort of moving into. And this morning I was in a planning meeting around our all-age worship, and we were saying actually it really doesn't look like we're going to be back into physical spaces with each other for quite a while. And so we might find ourselves doing these fortnightly services maybe for another 3, 4, 5, 6 months, maybe into 2021, and some of the impact of that is sort of worth perhaps considering, because people aren't going to have that physical experience of actually gathering with one another. So lots really for you to bring and share with us if those are the sorts of circumstances that perhaps you're experiencing as well. We're going to move into our conclusion time. This afternoon has flown by, goodness me, I don't know quite where the time has gone. So a few things to sum up that are on slide 11 here. Some of the things hopefully which maybe have occurred to us during the course of this afternoon. One thing which is really about the importance of transparency and being open, and that's for us as people to perhaps be open and a little bit vulnerable with some of what we're experiencing, and a willingness to share that with people. I also think it's an openness about when we're inviting people into different spaces that we're really clear about what it is that they're coming to. So we're saying that this is going to be just a time of conversation. But it might also, we may want to say, do you know, we're going to pray together for 5 minutes at the end, and you're welcome to join in, but you're not. People always appreciate when we're just clear about that stuff. I think sometimes folk can feel occasionally like they've sort of just been kidnapped and brought into a Christian space without quite knowing. So it's just being aware of being alert to that, so that we tell people what to expect. And a really important thing is around how we measure success. And so there can be a temptation that we think, do you know what, I sent out 5 cards and only 1 person replied. That's not great success. Or that, you know, I let everybody know that we were going to have this Zoom coffee morning. I emailed 40 people and there were only actually 3 people came. So that was a waste of my time. And what I would really heartily want to say to you is, don't measure your success always by the numbers. It's not always the numbers that tell the story. And so often, particularly in a time like this, it may be more about deepening relationships. So perhaps you've got to know 2 or 3 families better. You've noticed that they're coming along to virtual sessions perhaps that you're doing. And it's really worth holding on to those things. So how relationships develop and change, and maybe how, as Claire sort of mentioned, that, you know, it's just seeing that perhaps there are some dads joining in some things. Measure success differently, and don't assume that the numbers of people taking part is always going to tell you the significance or the impact of something. Look at other ways to measure success. And I'd also want to really urge you to prayerfully approach everything. And whether that means that you can grab 2 minutes beforehand, whether that means that you want to set aside some time just to draw yourself into space with God by yourself for half a day, if you've got the luxury of that, that may feel quite luxurious, or whether it's just that, do you know, once a month, I'm just going to spend time seeking God around all the stuff that I'm doing and involved in, because I really want to be tuned in and listening to him. So let's keep that as the bedrock, really, the foundations of what we're doing, so that we're really alert and aware that God is leading us always into different things. So I hope this afternoon has been useful. I hope that it prompts more thinking. As much as we've been together for just over an hour, there's more thinking for you to do, perhaps to go away now and to think about. I'm going to say again, please do buy my book. That would be amazing. I wrote it for a purpose. I wrote it for people to read it. I got to spend yesterday morning with some folk from the Forces, the Methodist Forces Board Children and Family Workers. They had a development day exploring chapters in the book, and it was just really great to be in that space with them and to hear what thoughts it prompts for them, how it's impacting their practice, how it's making them think differently. And that's really why I wrote it. I don't want it to sit on people's shelves. I want you to scribble in it. I want you to fold over page corners. I want you to, maybe if you really need to, just cross bits out, because you know that's not relevant to me. Let it be a manual to support and equip you in the work that you're doing. Also, I did notice, I had a quick little check on Twitter. Some of you have been tweeting where you are, so that's been lovely to see this afternoon. We'll have another little look and we'll give you the rest of today to email in your pictures, and then we will choose those 5 books for giveaway at the end. We'll do that on Monday, and so we'll be in touch with you then. Now, I'm just wondering if we go into if we go out of the PowerPoint, if we just come back on as panelists. So I know that there have been a few questions. So Lynn, I wonder if you want to just share some of those, because I've not been able to keep up with the chat.
Sure. So we had a question about whether or not the mental health and wellbeing webinar will be recorded, and all being well with technology, the answer to that one is yes. So we'll post that just as we will with this one on the Well Learning Hub YouTube channel after we've delivered it. We've had a question about Messy Church, and we've had a comment about Messy Church as well. So the comment was from Fiona, who says she's been doing Messy Church on Zoom but finds that the non-church families aren't connecting. She's planning to send out some activity packs, but has been creating a PowerPoint full of activities and links, but has no idea if some of the families are using it. She's relatively new to the role, so still building relationships, but at first didn't have all the contact details because of being locked away at work. And she's found a personal phone call or a text gets a lot more response. So that's a really helpful comment. Let me find the Messy Church question, which was directed specifically at Claire, but Gail, I'm sure you can offer some wisdom as well. So this was from Claire. She's asked, I've done 3 sessions of Messy Church on Zoom so far. I've only had children come along so far, with adults just in the background. Can you give some suggestions on where you get resources and ideas from? I've been using Roots, Messy Church website and crafts on the internet generally, but what else are you using?
Okay, so I have not been doing it massively formally. We've had a story and a bit of a theme and prayer, but and some examples of craft, because it's quite hard to do actual craft on Zoom. But I have found what's worked for me is more and more beneficial, and people have really appreciated, is the time of sharing. So kind of catching up with people, what have you been doing, talking to the children about what they've been doing at homeschool. I've got one family where the mum works in a hospital and the children have been going to creche at the hospital, so we've been talking about what they've been doing. And I've found that it's more beneficial for me with my families to, yes, include the kind of God-centered story and some prayer, but actually I think that we need to be concentrating on relationships and spending time with those people and sharing and facilitating those conversations as much as anything else, if not more maybe, because I want to show that we're accessible and be accessible to them, I guess, rather than just kind of going and giving them another school lesson.
Yeah, I was just going to say as well that our church created some Messy Church packs. People contributed all kinds of ideas and bought the stuff. They've gone into little bags and they got delivered just to families and put sort of on their doorstep. And that was predominantly craft type things. But what seems to sort of work is doing that and then maybe saying that we're going to gather on this date and time, and then you can show and tell, and kids, and you may still find that it's just the children who are there. You may spot the odd sort of parent lurking in the background, but there's something about being able to do that's and maybe encouraging the adults to join in making some of those things. So I know recently when we did an all-age service that we encouraged everybody to bring a sheep. And so we gave them some ideas of how you could make a sheep, you could paint one, you could craft one with cotton wool. And people were so creative. And I really urge people of all ages that this is not something for the kids, this is for everybody. And so we had some very cool Lego sheep. People had gone away and found how you could make a little sheep with your Lego. That was amazing. And an older lady, I think a lady in her 70s, had made sheep ears for herself on a headband. And I just loved some of that creativity and people's willingness. There was just that beautiful moment where I said, right, everyone, show us your sheep. And all of that sort of just appeared on the screen. So maybe it's I wonder if it's back to front, maybe do some making before and then kind of gather, maybe Claire, like, you know, doing some of that
Yeah.
informal.
Yeah, so one of the sessions I did was about Noah, just because we kind of took it back to basics. There's rainbows in every window, and an adult said to me, why rainbows though? And I was mortified. I was kind of like, what do you mean why rainbows? What do you mean why rainbows are a symbol of hope? So it prompted me to kind of go back, and I used Paul Carenza has got a book about Noah's Ark car park. He's written, it's really, really good. So we kind of did that as a fun thing. But beforehand, I'd asked the families to all show me their, or bring along to Zoom, all their rainbows and things that they've been making, and that worked really well. But I do think that yeah, I personally send things, not physical packs out, but I make contact with the families at least every week, and I just think that you won't know whether non-church families are engaging with that stuff or not, but they probably do really appreciate that contact with the church, actually. So what's the harm?
Yeah.
Respect.
Were there any other questions, Lynn?
Yes, and we've had a comment from Natalie as well, who says that she sends out one craft a week by email and Facebook prior to a monthly messy church, second one next week, and that's at Shaftesbury Bell Street. We had a general question from Wendy, who asked about any other useful resources or websites that can be utilised.
Okay, so I'm starting to feel mildly embarrassed about doing this, but my book. So at the end of chapter 5, is it in that chapter? I thought it was at the end of the chapter. Okay, so at the very end, actually, so we're looking at, there's this further reading and resources little section. And chapter by chapter, I've included some further reading. There are examples of websites. And in fact, the one that's probably about support is the longest one. So there's a whole page and a half of different places where you can go and look for supports. So that would be my top tip, is to kind of look at those pages and choose what you need.
Great, thank you. We had a comment from Claire, who basically says that her biggest challenge is encouraging church members who are instrumental in face-to-face children's work but don't like technology, and so are struggling to connect with children and young people and families. I'm sure we can all empathise with that. We've also had a question, and this one, I've said slightly complicated one till the end, I think, so I apologise. But how do we persuade churches, this is from Christine, to take workers off of furlough so that they can engage with families that they were in contact with? It's so important, but doesn't seem that the church is seeing that as a priority. Any thoughts on that? Sorry, it's a tricky one for the end, but an important one.
That is a real shame, and I guess there are lots of pragmatic reasons why churches are doing that, financial reasons. I think that if there is a way to kind of petition, depending on the situation that you're in, if there is a way to negotiate that, my understanding of the furlough system is that there is kind of ability, I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, that you can be part-time, for instance, that you can decrease your hours. That may or may not be true, so please don't take my word for it, but maybe there is a way to do some of that, and perhaps also to reflect, you know, if you've been to a session like this and you're saying, look, I'm hearing that other people are doing these things, give some examples, say that you're aware of this need in your context. Those might be quite persuasive arguments for people to actually think about perhaps doing things differently.
Thank you. We've had a couple more comments, and then I think that's it. I do apologise if I've missed anybody's question. So Rachel's recommended Flame Creative as a really great website, and I think we could second that because it's one that we always recommend as a children, youth and family team. And I also had a comment from Angela about Boys Brigade. She's been doing that via Zoom for weeks now, and then she's recently done a separate meetings for younger and older members. It was mentioned that a meeting just for adults would also be useful. So tonight we're having a parent Zoom meeting. So
brilliant.
And I think that was also a similar comment as well that we've had from Dubai, which is great. We've gone international. And so the kids ministry team are preparing some activities and sending those out to parents, and a group chat of parents is really helpful to share concerns and share the materials for the children. And they're also going to be meeting groups. I think that was everybody. As I say, I do apologise if I missed some questions. They came in thick and fast towards the end. So
Thanks, Lynn. Do you want to close our time out now with that last activity?
I will do. We're going to move into a time of prayer just to finish, and the chat function is still open. What we'd like to do is just sit quietly for 5 minutes, and if there's a particular family or concern that's on your mind that you want to lift up now in a time of prayer to God, then please add that to the chat function, and then after 5 minutes of quiet, I'll end us with a very short prayer, offering those to God. Lord God, we thank you for all these families that have been offered up to you today, and for all the many more that we serve and care for. Thank you for all the workers who've attended this webinar and for their real heart for the families in their communities and their desire to love and to serve them. I pray that you'll be with us all, that you'll bring peace, that you'll work through us, that you'll help us to offer reassurance, help us to offer love, help us to offer hope, and help us to offer practical help. I pray for those workers who are furloughed, that they won't feel put aside, but will feel useful and purposeful. I pray that you'll facilitate conversations in churches about what the future might hold and a way forward. And I pray that you'll be with us as we go now into the rest of our day and our weekend. In Jesus' name, amen.
So just to close, thank you so much for sharing all of those people, and that felt like a very holy moment to me, bringing all of those people and that sense of God seeing the names that we've written and placed there and the people that we care about. Matt, if we just move to the next slide, we're going to wrap up now. I want to say thanks ever so much for joining us. Don't forget, you can watch again. You know, if you've got some time on your hands, you can sit down and watch the whole webinar. It's been recorded and we're going to make that available to you. And of course, as Lynn said, it's going to be on the Well Learning Hub. And of course, we've got some other upcoming webinars. So please check the Children and Youth website pages on the Methodist Church website. It's under the upcoming events tab. So take a look there. We're going to be adding some more things, so you may want to just be checking back now and again, but we hope that we will see you soon. So take care, folks. Thanks for being with us. Bye-bye.